Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." If you were Iran, you'd probably believe that you were mostly already at war with the United States anyway, since we've asserted that their government needs regime change. So, and we've asked Congress to appropriate $75 million to do it, and we are supporting terrorist groups, apparently, who are infiltrating and blowing up things inside Iran. And if we're not doing it, let's put it this way, we're probably cognizant of it and encouraging it.
Let's talk about Iraq, 20 years after the U.S. invasion. In 2003, the U.S. and a handful of allies invaded Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein on the premise that he had
weapons of mass destruction.
Well, that turned out not to be true, and the war kicked off a cycle of violence and political instability that Iraq is still caught up in.
The nearly 8-year-long war in Syria has left hundreds of thousands of people dead. So how did we get here, and what are U.S. forces doing in Syria? In 2011, uprisings rippled through the Middle East. Leaders fell in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. And after months of anti-government protests in Syria, the U.S. had a message for President Bashar al-Assad.
This morning, President Obama called on Assad to step aside.
He didn't, and the conflict escalated. But a new threat was also emerging: ISIS. In 2014, the U.S. began supporting rebel groups to fight extremists, while also conducting airstrikes as part of an international coalition. U.S. troops have had run-ins with Assad's forces, as well as groups backed by Russia and Iran. Since taking office, Trump has ordered 2 strikes on areas controlled by Assad in response to chemical weapons attacks.
We are prepared to sustain this response until the Syrian regime stops its use of prohibited chemical agents.
Washington's been trying to tilt the balance of military power in the country away from Iran-backed Hezbollah, which it considers a terrorist organization.
Lebanese armed forces need to maintain their rightful place as the sole provider of security and stability to the Lebanese people.
Lebanon is on the front lines in the fight against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah.
U.S. President Donald Trump faced backlash for seeming to misunderstand basic Lebanese politics.
Good afternoon. This is an update from CBS News. I'm Russ Mitchell in New York. A major attack led by the U.S. is underway against Muammar Gaddafi's air defense systems in Libya. U.S. and British warships and submarines in the Mediterranean have launched more than 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles at 20 sites near Tripoli and along the coast.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
To Somalia now, and American officials have confirmed U.S. Special Forces helped carry out Wednesday's raid against al-Shabaab militants. They were accompanied by Somali troops. The militant group claims it fought off foreign fighters in the central part of the country, but U.S. officials say several militants were killed. Wednesday's raid comes days after American airstrikes against al-Shabaab positions. At least 150 militants were reportedly killed. It appears as if the United States is stepping up its efforts against al-Shabaab, but the group is still able to launch devastating attacks across Somalia. Let's get more details now on this development from Somalia. And CCTV's Daniel Rangis is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Daniel, the U.S. has confirmed the involvement of its special forces in the operation on Tuesday, barely a day after it's conducted a high-casualty strike that involved multiple U.S. aircraft, including drones and jet fighters. What's the explanation for this U.S. escalation in Somalia?
Nikki Haley says nothing prepared her for the level of suffering she saw when she recently visited South Sudanese refugee camps.
Women are giving birth on dirt floors that have now turned to mud by the fact that it's the rainy season. There is nothing that prepares you for the sobs of the South Sudanese women, nearly all of whom have been raped, sometimes repeatedly.
South Sudan says it is disappointed over a U.S. report accusing it of supporting rebels in neighboring Sudan. Juba has rubbished the report and accused the United States of attempting to incite war between the two nations. The United States released a statement urging the Juba administration to immediately cease providing support to Sudanese rebels while fighting to topple Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. President Bashir has meanwhile welcomed the report. The Sudanese leader has threatened to scrap deals and peace agreements with Sudan's southern neighbor if South Sudan continues to support rebels. President Bashir also blamed the U.S. for the current crisis in South Sudan.
What sort of impact would it have if the U.S. does indeed go ahead and stop aid if the two warring sides don't reach some sort of ceasefire deal?
Well, for South Sudan, that would be a very significant move. I mean, the US was the sort of godfather of South Sudan. They backed the secession and the creation of the nation, and they backed it politically and financially as well. South Sudan depended to a large extent on very large amounts of aid from the US, and also they had oil revenues, but oil revenues are now stopped. Of course, with the fighting going on, there's no chance of extracting oil anytime soon. So if aid gets cut off as well, then that basically cuts off almost all the income for the government of South Sudan. So that would put serious pressure on them to come to the table. But whether or not that would be enough to de-escalate the tensions between the Vice President and the former Vice President will remain to be seen.
All right, thanks for that, Malcolm Webb.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the rest of you. It's Friday at about 7:30 in the morning. I'm Errol Barnett. Our top story is the ongoing fighting in the Middle East. Israel launched attacks against Iran. This video shows one building on fire, and there are several images showing large plumes of smoke rising over other parts of the country. President Trump posted this on social media a short time ago, writing, quote, "Iran must make a deal before there's nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction. Just do it," the president says, "before it's too late."
At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps.
In 2011, uprisings rippled through the Middle East. Leaders fell in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt.
But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him.
All the options.
What do you think of that option, sir?
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia.
But we have more breaking news. Columns of Chinese military vehicles crossed the border, and not only the Chinese, but the Russian as well. Get a load of this video right here, guys.
Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him.